Escoffier. Okay, I will answer this later. Alright, so Escoffier. Okay, alright. You know what? I'll answer all of these questions in this video itself to help you decide whether to pull for her or not. But before that, we need to learn everything about her so that those questions actually make sense to you all. So let's start with this complete, comprehensive, full, detailed, thorough, all-in-one, definitive and exhaustive guide for Escoffier, and I promise you that once you see this video, you will have no doubts whatsoever regarding her kit, weapons, team comps, artifacts, constellations and whatever else you can think of. But if you still have any questions after watching this video,
I have so many questions!
then make sure to drop them down in the comments below and I'll respond to each and every one of you individually, or you could just join the newly launched channel membership to add me on Discord and chat with me directly regarding anything, or even get your account reviewed if that's something you want. Now, before we get into it, let me just quickly mention two things. First is that going forward in this video, I'll be calling her by her nickname Coffee. Second is that if you have seen my last video on Coffee, then feel free to skip these parts of this current video as they are literally the same, because there have been no changes to Coffee since then. With all this being said, let's get right into it. Starting off with her elemental skill, which has two versions, tap and hold. So when you tap the skill button, she summons a cooking pot which deals cryo damage to the enemy every second for a total of 21 times. And the good thing about this pot is that it follows the active character, so enemies can't really get out of its range. However, if you are using Newell for instance who attacks from a distance, then you're also being chilling since the range of this cooking pot is quite decent, roughly equal to the circular dry patch of land around Masanori. Now, the crazy thing about her skill is that it has a 100% uptime with its duration far exceeding its cooldown. And if you are wondering how does this cooking pot even choose its target, well, it seems to be proximity based, so it'll attack whichever enemy is close by. Moving on to her burst, which is just a big cryo AoE attack along with a single tick of team-wide healing, and that's it. However, her passives are what push her to be a top tier support. The first passive essentially makes it so that after the burst, the active character is healed for an additional 9 seconds on top of the team-wide heal for a total of 9 times. The second passive is the one which locks her to cryo and hydro teammates only. But what exactly does this passive do, you ask? Well, you see, this passive shreds the resistance of any enemy hit by her skill or burst by 55% for 12 seconds as long as the team has 4 cryo or hydro units. But what if you have less than 4 cryo or hydro teammates? Well, in that case, the rest shred is substantially less, being 15% for 3, 10% for 2 and 5% for 1. And well, at that levels, it's simply not good, thus kinda restricting her to hydro and cryo teammates. But this doesn't mean there are no viable non-cryo or hydro teams. In fact, there are many, but those teams will probably do less damage than if you were to run in with another unit. Now, since we are done discussing the combat part of her kit, let's just quickly go over the whole version of her skill, since that has a lot of misinformation being spread about it. Okay, so if you hold the E button, Coffee summons her cooking pot in the front like parametric transformer, and then you gotta do elemental attacks on it, and after 7 elemental attacks, her cooking pot will produce 1 dish. Now, this process can be repeated for a total of 10 times per week, with the chances of getting a 3-star, 4-star or 5-star dish being 60, 30 and 10%. Also, his ability to make 10 food items resets every Monday, regardless of what day the cooking pot was used in the previous week. And if you have been enjoying the video so far, then a sub to the channel would be beautiful. So, now that we understand her kit perfectly, let's talk weapons. And to no one's surprise, her signature is obviously the best in slot because it provides a lot of crit damage along with buffing other units in the party with 32% attack. Now besides this, her other potential weapons would be statistics like Homa, Calamity Queller, Engulfing or even Skyward Spine, with each weapon providing something of value. As for the free-to-play weapons, I'd suggest just going with Favonius Lance, as that will provide a lot of ER along with providing extra particles for other units in the party who have high ER requirements like Yelan, Furina or Citlali. And not to mention, most people have that weapon at R5 anyway. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about Kachina's weapon? After all, it has ER as a secondary stat and boosts elemental skill damage through its passive, which, let's be honest, is something Coffee would love to have. And well, you aren't wrong in thinking that. In fact, if you have that weapon at R5, then you should definitely use it, as it is about 5% better than Favonius. However, the reason I didn't mention this weapon is because you gotta pull for it on the weapon bearer, which is a scam, let's be honest. But anyway, other than this, you could also use the 5.4 event weapon, Missive Wind Spear or even Blackcliff Pole. The full list of her weapon rankings is displayed on screen. Moving on to her artifacts, Golden Troop is her best option as it increases her elemental skill damage by 70%. I mean, what else do you need? But I know some of you are on the edge of your seat wanting to shout Blizzard. So let's discuss Golden Troop versus Blizzard. Now, can Blizzard be better than Golden Troop? Yes. Then why did I suggest Golden Troop in the first place? Well, it's because Blizzard is only better in cases where the enemy can be frozen, and that too by 5 to 10% depending on the weapon Coffee has. If, however, the enemy can't be frozen and can only have cryo applied on it, then Blizzard is around 9% worse than the Golden set. And for these reasons, my recommendation would be to use Golden Troop only with the standard build choice of attack, cryo damage bonus goblet, and crit rate or damage circlet depending on your crit values. Also, try to get at least 120 ER if using her in triple cryo teams, 170 for double cryo, and 220 for solo cryo. You can also choose to run ER signs on her to reach these requirements, but then switch out the cryo damage bonus goblet with an attack one. Though in general, I wouldn't recommend running ER signs at all. Now, I know there is a debate on whether attack goblet is a better choice than cryo goblet or not, and to give you a one-line answer, it's cryo damage bonus goblet when using her with Shenhe and attack goblet when using her with a Hydro DPS, though even that varies with weapon. Do keep in mind that if you have a signature weapon, then cryo damage bonus is the better choice regardless of the team. Now, before we discuss teams, let's discuss Constellations rapid fire style. Constellation 1, 60% extra crit damage to cryo attacks by the entire team provided all team units are either Hydro or cryo. Constellation 2, Shenhe's quill effects with 3 times the buff, but unlike Shenhe, it's only for a total of 5 times for the entire team. Constellation 3, extra levels to skill. Constellation 4, extra 6 seconds to the active character heals after burst, along with a chance to heal herself and get an additional 2 energy as well. And how often this effect occurs is based on her crit rate. Constellation 5, extra levels to burst. Constellation 6, extra coordinated attack from her cooking pot every 0.5 seconds for a total of 6 times.
Editor here. Do note that her constellation breakpoints are C1, C2, and C3. And if I were to rank them in terms of importance, it'd be C1 followed by C3 and C2.
As for the question of C1 versus signature, I'd say go for the signature as it is a solid option for other Pola healers too, like Yao Yao or Mika. With all that being said, let's discuss teams. And right off the bat, the Dragon Chef is my personal number 1 damage-wise and fun-wise. I'd say it's even better than Wet Socks in the Coffee team, even though the latter does more damage on paper. But of course, theoretical damage is never equal to practical damage, especially for melee units who can get interrupted easily. The same, however, doesn't apply to Dragon Daddy's teams because he attacks from a distance, so the difference between theoretical and practical damage won't be as much. Now, you might be wondering, how does the Dragon Chef team compare to New Villet's best team with Xilonen and Kazuha? And well, I'd say that both teams are pretty neck and neck. However, the Dragon Chef team is better in single target scenarios, whereas Xilonen Kazuha team is better in AoE scenarios. Now, apart from these two teams, you can use any other Hydro or Cryo DPS too, like Ryosli, Ganyu, Ayato, or even Nilu if you like her. But one important thing to note is that Yelan is a better choice in the Ryosli team compared to Shenhe, while Shenhe is much better than Yelan in the Ayaka team. Now, of course, if you don't have these support units, then you can mix and match with other Cryo or Hydro units, but the damage will be kinda less in those teams obviously. With that being said, let me ask you this question. Which Coffee team do you think will do the most damage? Now, if your answer was Ayaka or even New Villet, then well, you're wrong. And that's cause her best team DPS wise is literally with the best damage core of the entire game, Mauvika Melt. So a team of Mauvika, Stitlali, Coffee and Bennett actually has the most DPS, thus making it her best team damage-wise. But if that is the case, then what's the point of restricting her to Cryo or Hydro teammates? Well, you see, if I were a betting man, I'd say this is meant to benefit Skirk more than anyone else, who I believe will have a DPS on par with Mauvika, if not better. But of course, take all of this with a grain of salt as this is just a theory. Now, other than the Mauvika team, you can also run her in the next best thing are Lakino, Hutao, or if you are a Masact, then Yoimiya. Special mention to Child and Yola teams as I'm a big fan of those two. And if you have been enjoying this video so far, then a sub to the channel would be delicious. So now that we understand everything about her, there are some issues with her, and what exactly are they, you ask? Well, I'm talking about skill issue. On a serious note, the issue definitely has to do with skill. And what do I mean by that? Well, you see, Coffee's best teams are with Ayaka, Ryosli, Ganyu, and New Villet. And besides the New Villet team, all others have survivability issues, especially in Abyss. But you might say that Coffee is a great healer, and honestly, you aren't wrong in saying that. However, an average player doing Abyss will most definitely get one-shotted or even two-shotted by enemies. But once again, you might say that Stitlali could be used in her teams. After all, she is a shielder who is a cryo unit, thus fulfilling Coffee's requirement of a cryo cryo or hydro character. And well, once again, you aren't wrong in thinking that. However, let me just say this. If you're gonna die even with 3000 healing per second, then a 10k shield ain't doing shit for you. Now of course, if you are a god gamer who can dodge everything, then whatever I said before doesn't apply to you. But if not, then good luck. And speaking of Xilonen, another issue with her in the team is that you will have to give up on either using TTDS with her or scroll because the attack timing simply won't line up. For instance, in a team of let's say Coffee, Ayaka, Furina and Xilonen,
Editor here. And one thing I forgot to mention was that the rotation I'm considering here is Furina, followed by Coffee, Xilonen, and finally Ayaka. Now, in this rotation,
scroll probably won't be activated because Xilonen won't be the one to trigger any reactions, therefore not activating scroll. If instead you use Xilonen right after Furina but before Coffee, then scroll will be activated for sure, but you'll lose out on the TTDS buff. And due to this issue, Xilonen becomes an okayish teammate for her, with better replacements being Yelan or Shenhe.
Editor here. And one thing I forgot to mention was that Nuvalet is an exception to the Xilonen problem since he scales off of HP, so Xilonen works with him because you don't want TTDS for him anyways.
Okay, so let's backtrack a bit to the statement I made a minute ago. If you're gonna die even with 3000 healing per second, then a 10k shield ain't doing shit for you. Now, if you're wondering about the 3k healing and how it compares to other units, then I'd say that she's on par with Xilonen. But wait, Xilonen does over 6k healing per tick. Then how is she even comparable to Coffee? Well, you see, if we assume standard build on Coffee with 2k attack, then first of all, immediately after using the burst, the party will be healed for 8.3k per character, followed by single character healing of 3.1k per tick. And if you add these together, you get a total healing of 8.3 into 4 plus 3.1 into 9, which gives you 61k healing in total. In comparison, if we assume Xilonen on Favonia's build with 3k defense and no Furina in team, you get a healing of 6.4k per tick, totaling 51k, which is less than what you are getting with Coffee. Now, the reason I like her healing a bit more is the initial team-wide heal with her burst, which is really good for Furina stacks and breathing life into units who are almost dead. With all this being said, does this mean that CRYO is safe, that CRYO is cooking now, that CRYO is meta, that CRYO has been made great again? Yes and no. While I do think that her healing is really solid and her off-field damage combined with her buffs is really strong, which let's be honest is something freeze teams really need, I personally don't think this alone can save CRYO. Cause for me, saving an element doesn't just mean pull one unit and have it on every team. Rather, it's something done to the element itself which will make it stronger, like how Dendro did with Electro. And this is where Imaginarium Theater comes into play. Now, if you're confused about what I just yapped, then allow me to explain. You see, 5.6 Theater has a new reaction between CRYO and Dendro called Rhinegrass, and without going into its specifics, this is exactly what I think is needed to save CRYO. Not this exact reaction per se, but a revamped version of it in version 6.0, because that'll enable even old CRYO characters to become great again, like how Kaching became a good unit with the introduction of Dendro. And besides introducing a new reaction, we also need buffs to existing CRYO reactions like Freeze or Shatter to quote-unquote save the element. Now finally, let's discuss what I said in the beginning about Ayaka being a top 5 DPS with a catch. You see, I still stand by the statement that Ayaka will become top 5 DPS with the release of Coffee, theoretically. And what do I mean by that? Well, generally, theoretical damage doesn't always translate to actual in-game damage because of factors like dodging, crit issues, and with Ayaka in particular, her burst hitting the enemy continuously. So it's generally recommended to take tactical damage as 70% of theoretical damage, which don't get me wrong, is still really good, but not top 5 DPS level. With all this being said, I believe that Coffee is a really strong unit within her niche, but not necessarily limited to it. While her value drops outside of freeze teams, she still performs well in other compositions outside of it. And unlike people claiming that her damage capabilities while being a support unit are bad for the game, I think her damage is extremely justified since freeze lacks any noticeable damage from reactions. Overall, I'd say that she is a really powerful unit without being overpowered and an extremely valuable unit to get if you are a fan of CRYO, Ayaka, or prepping for Skirk and the CRYO Archon. But hey,
that's just a theory. A game theory.